All right, Regan, thanks so much for doing this. First off, if you could tell me a little bit about yourself and how you started in the disability community, that'd be great, and we can go from there.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm Regan Linton, and I grew up in Denver, Colorado. Grew up actually on two legs. I didn't have a disability when I was young, and then when I was in college, I went to USC in Los Angeles and was in a car accident when I was in undergrad and paralyzed from my chest down. So that's when I kind of joined the community and had my whole world, I guess some would say turned upside down. I don't think it's really turned upside down. It's more just expanded. uh, but yeah, so now I'm a manual wheelchair user. And after my injury, kind of didn't think that I had been involved in athletics and arts previously and didn't really think that that would be an option for me, especially because this was 24 years ago that I was injured. But fortunately discovered a theater company where I kind of got back involved in the arts, and from there ended up going to grad school and now working as a professional actor, writer, director, creator, and advocate. So
Yeah,
yeah.
let's talk a little bit about that. What do you do in the theater space? Tell me a little bit about that.
So I guess my way in was originally as an actor, which I started in high school prior to my disability, and then continued afterward. Thanks the company that I referred to a couple moments ago is called Family with a PH, so it's PHAMALY. It's based in Denver. It was founded in 1989 by a group of disabled theater performers that wanted to perform and felt like they didn't have a place, so they made their own company. So they're the ones that I found post injury and got back on stage and kind of started, learning about my body as an instrument and the adaptation of like that it still had so much creative possibility, but I just had to learn its new creative possibility and, how to move, how to position myself, how to be seen by others, all of those kind of general arts practices, but now through the lens of disability. So I think that was my way back into the arts as an actor, and I did many plays and musicals with family. Then went to grad school for my MFA in acting at UC San Diego, and continued on to there from there to work professionally. I've understudied on Broadway. I've worked across the country, and that then led me into also directing and writing. So now I write some of my own material. I just premiered a show about FDR where I play FDR, that I wrote and perform in, and have also done some film projects and such. So yeah, I kind of do a bit of everything now as a creator, which I think when you're in the arts, it's hard to just stay in one thing, especially I think as a disabled artist, where you start to see the ways in which the systems that we're working in are not always accessible. And so you want to kind of come at it from every angle, as an actor, director, writer, administrator, advocate, to see how can we update and make all of these aspects more accessible to everybody.
Mm-hmm. So, like, do you teach like actors about the concepts of acting within the context of like disabled acting and all that stuff?
Yeah, it's funny you ask that because I'm in the process. So yes, I have taught many times at many different institutions, and I think, now I'm always coming through a lens, intentionally or unintentionally, from disability and the disability knowledges that I hold now in my body, and also from our kind of disability originals that have also worked prior to us to make the world more accessible. So, I think there are a lot of things that are inherent in disability culture, whether it be interdependence, whether it be collaboration, whether it be communication, whether it be um, uh, adaptation. Those are all skills that then can be applied to art spaces. So I definitely bring it into my acting, in, very like kind of concrete ways of like, if I'm moving through the space on wheels, what are the choices that I can make that are different, to be compelling from an actor who's working on two legs? Or if we're bringing accessibility into the space, for instance, with my FDR show that I'm doing right now, we have access tools in the space always, including ASL. The second actor in the show is a deaf actor. We are bringing captioning in for all performances, audio description, and then how do you just really make, I think for me, access is about all those tools, but it's mostly about making everybody feel welcome and significant. So how do you set up a space differently so that it doesn't feel like if somebody's wheeling in or using a mobility device or needing one of these access tools that they are on the margins or they're the exception, but rather they're the rule. They're centered. So how can we do that to, in all of our art spaces to make it more of an integrated setting, I guess.
Hmm. Do you remember what your first audition was and what was that moment like?
Well, uh, the first time getting back on stage after my injury was when I went back to USC to finish my undergrad degree. I decided to take a solo performance class, and probably one of the most terrifying but best things that I had ever done. So I didn't really audition for that, but I would go into the class, and I was the only wheeler person with a visible disability. I'm sure that other people had, other invisible disabilities, but our professor, really pushed us to one of his questions he would always ask is like, why do I care? And that's something that's difficult to hear as a human being, as you're telling your personal story. But it really helped me to think about more intricately about like, okay, I have this story, but how do I not make it all about me? How do I relate it to the people in the audience? How do I make it a more universal experience in terms of what I'm relating? And then that led me to the first time I officially auditioned was with family in Denver. And I remember it was Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. And people had been saying like, oh, you should go audition. And I was like, ah, no, 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 I don't know about that. And so the initial auditions passed. And then I worked up the courage and I was just like, you know what? Eff it. I got to get in there. And so I went into the callbacks and I remember it. It was a really, uh, it was for me being somebody that acquired a disability to kind of exist in those two realities of like what I had been and what I was now and coming to terms with now, being on wheels and presenting myself, auditioning, also in a room of, I mean, this was a pretty affirmative, supportive theater company because they worked with disability. But then, after that, when I've gone into audition and audition rooms in Hollywood where they have very little connection to disability. And so thinking about like, what is their experience of you coming in and how are you, I often say, for most actors who don't have disabilities, they might have 2 minutes to do their monologue and prove that they deserve the role. For me, rolling in, often it feels like those 2 minutes, not only do I have to prove that I deserve the role, but I also have to prove that I'm worthy of being alive and that I'm valuable, to these people that sometimes don't have any context for disability. So over the years, I've learned how to, kind of hold all of that in an audition room or in a performance scenario. But that first audition was definitely terrifying. But you know what? Then when I got in, and breathed and did it. And it was just like, one of the hugest accomplishments I think I'd ever felt in my life.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned disabled actors in Hollywood because there's a disabled actress who was on Wicked and she was in a wheelchair. I can't remember what her name is, but she did a wonderful performance.
She's actually a good friend of mine. Well, sorry, if you're referring to the film, I that
Yeah, the
is,
film. Yeah.
yeah. I don't know, and I'm completely forgetting her name right now, who plays Nessa. Uh, she's great, but my friend Jenna, who I performed with that family, is the current Nessa on Broadway. She's the first wheelchair user to actually be cast in the Broadway production of Wicked. So, and I think she's continuing for another year. So if anybody wants to see Wicked, definitely go while she's performing because she's extraordinary.
Yeah, because I mean, I remember I also auditioned for a play many, many years ago. It was elementary school, and I was
Hmm.
Andre the Giant. I think the play
Ah,
was Rocking Around Sherwood Forest, and I was a disabled, I played Andre the Giant, and so I had like this like beret on my head. I had like a
ah,
gray shirt and black pants, and I only said one line, which was set up the final scene, and that was it. And then I
oh,
also auditioned for Hairspray, which is a famous, play set in the 50s. You know, I didn't get it, but it was real. I auditioned for it and I was terrified.
It is. I mean, and that's even something. So I became artistic director of Family, the theater company. And I was very aware of like also how have these audition environments been set up over the years, traditional environments that in kind of make it very intimidating, rather than kind of setting it up so that people feel supported and like they're a full human being. So when I was a Family, we would try to adjust some of the ways in which we did auditions, whether it was like having many people in the room all at one time and you're learning material all together instead of just one person coming in and you have the people sitting behind the table and it feels like, they're all giving you the death stare in terms of like,
Mhm.
even though they want you to succeed, but it doesn't feel that way. So, it's a great example of like the spaces that little a or big A don't feel that accessible or supportive that I think we can shift. But I'm glad to hear that you auditioned and went for it because I think it's a great experience to have of just like putting yourself out there, taking the plunge and when you get to be in that show, even if it's just one line, right? There are no small roles, only small actors, and you get to bring your unique experience to it, which I think we need much more of in this world.
Yeah, okay, switching gears, let's talk about the documentary that you made. What made you, write about it and document it?
Yeah, so I had been with Family performing and working for maybe about 10 years at that point. And it's again, the theater company is in Denver, but there were still so many people in Denver and beyond who didn't know about this theater company. And so I was like, I really have always wanted to make it like a documentary or something that could go out further and wider and so that we could let people know about this unique company. And so I started talking to a friend that I was doing some educational videos with, and he was like, well, why don't we do it? So we did. And we decided to follow the production of Chicago, the musical that we did in 2019 from kind of start to finish, through auditions, through rehearsals, through performances. And we kind of profiled a few of the different actors who were involved in that production. And there's always a natural dramatic arc to any theater process. And that one was no different, that each of the different people that we profiled had their own unique challenges as they were moving through the production, and the production had its own challenges. So that's kind of the basis of the documentary. And luckily, we put it out there, and it's now streaming. It's available with Real Abilities Film Festival, who that's a great film festival that I highly recommend. Um, but I think we need from my opinion, part of the reason that I make work is because I think a lot of stories about disability in the world today are often told from a non-disabled perspective or a non-disabled kind of creator, and they fall into a lot of tropes and stereotypes and typical ways that, and we in the disability community are very familiar with those, right? Like the villain or the inspiration. There's not
Right.
much space in between, for just complicated real human beings. And so I think that's what with the documentary I really wanted to show is like, here are these amazing artists who are also dealing with their stuff, but we're not like sensationalizing it. We're not making it melodramatic. We're just showing it as it is and following them. So I hope that's what people's experiences of the
Yeah,
documentary.
I'm glad that you mentioned that point because I remember watching a movie a couple of years ago called Me Before You, and it's about this, like guy who is paralyzed from a car accident, and then he has to get a caregiver and take care of him, and slowly he suddenly falls in love and starts to have a beautiful romantic relationship, and by the end he just kind of the ending was sad. He kind of writes a letter to his beloved and then commits suicide, which to me
Mhm.
I thought it was a sad ending, but I mean it just sort of encapsulates what you're saying, this narrative of like disabled people, being frail or being pity. And so yeah.
Totally. And I'm always, every time I see one more film or TV show or something where the disabled character dies in the end, I'm like, why could we never live? Because many of us are living, right? We're living our lives,
Exactly.
working, dating, having relationships, having children, having, any number of all the other experiences that everybody has in life. And yet those are not what get depicted in the stories that you see in, entertainment and media. And our humor, like I think our community, our disability community has some of the best humor of any community because, we deal with extreme things all the time. Like many of us are dealing with uh, kind of what a friend of mine used to call like life enhanced, or life in the extreme, because our days sometimes have a much wider pendulum of things that we're encountering, and that brings real natural drama to stories. So yeah, I get excited when I see any narrative that has a disabled character that actually survives, because I feel like they often kill us off in the end. So
Hmm.
that's a big bias of mine. I'm like,
Yeah.
if you're not going out in a blaze of glory, like an Armageddon, flying to some other planet or asteroid to explode it or something. That's what we need. We don't need like, oh, I'm committing suicide one more time because, I've fallen in love, and oh, go on living without me because that will just be better for you, whatever,
Hmm.
So yeah,
What
I'm
can
alone.
be done to change the narrative around sort of disabled people in the movie industry? Because it's all like dying, pity, and sad. So how can you make it more positive and uplifting?
I think I think it mostly has to do, number one, with having those of us in the community actually involved in making the stories, right? And then not getting pushed into making a particular narrative based on, producers, or what the producers think that the world wants. And I think, we continue to see some examples of that where people, disabled creators, whether it be writers, whether it be directors, actors, are like making content that is different and is not always even positive. I love seeing like a good disabled villain, or just, but somebody that has complexity. And so I think it really starts with like, we have to be in the room, we have to be participating, so that when they start writing something, if they're not disabled, if they're writing their idea of something, of like, oh, we think this is probably how it is based on our non-disabled perspective, we can intervene and say, no, actually, that's not how it is. When I get dressed in the morning, I'm not crying, I'm not like,
Hmm.
that's not my experience. I'm just doing it so I can get on to my next thing. So I think those little details really come first and foremost from our involvement, and we have to be the ones making the narrative, or at least involved in it, collaborating.
Hmm. What have you learned in doing this kind of work as a director, writer, creator?
Oh my gosh, so much. I mean, again, I think one of my big uh I guess lessons or things that I've learned is that I just think, again, people with disabilities are some of the most interesting, complex people that I've ever met. When I was injured, there were a lot of complicated feelings that I had about, all of a sudden now having a disability. But eventually, once I started to kind of be introduced to a community that I didn't really have much connection to prior to my injury, and I was like, man, I am so lucky because I'm now part of like the best community ever, with people who are just so fascinating and so vulnerable and compelling and charismatic, and they're adaptive and they're creative because we have to be, right? When we're moving through a world that isn't built for us, we naturally have to be creative and adaptive. Being disabled is a creative experience. And so I think that's one of the things that I've learned the most, is that actually the entertainment industry is really missing out because we are some of the most interesting people. And so if they would start getting to know us or involving us, they could, learn about our unique narratives that I think are really fascinating. And then I do think that we have to employ different tactics that many people don't, right? We have to ask for help on occasion, which technically everybody does. Nobody's doing it alone, but it's just a more regular piece of our experience. And there's no shame in that. It's actually connection. It's human connection. So, again, there are a lot of those things that I call kind of disability knowledges that come from the knowledge of being disabled or being in the disability community that I think are really assets to creative work. Yeah.
Hmm. And is there anything that you're planning on doing? Like, is there any sort of play that you're working on or planning to work on, or is what's on the horizon for you?
Yeah, I've got a number of projects kind of always that I'm excited about. Right now it is this it's called FDR's Very Happy Hour. So it's a happy hour with a dead president with FDR, where FDR is kind of introducing people to his legacy, both the positive things and the not so positive things. But it's really fun. It's an interactive theater piece that we're planning to tour this fall, 2026. And then I'm working on a couple other theater projects and kind of smaller film projects. And so we'll see how those kind of shape up. But I'm always just, my main goal is to just stay active and always creating and, any moment that I have, hopefully making something.
Hmm. Lastly, how can disabled actors, be a part of the theater industry and kind of be a part of that sort of theater community that oftentimes, in the theater space, they're not often represented or not often seen, and they're, kind of overlooked or on the sidelines,
Yeah, I mean, I think the first step is really just going out into your community, finding what exists, what theater companies are there, what kind of work are they doing? Are there open auditions? Can you take a class, like getting involved in classes and being able to articulate like what do you as a disabled person need in those spaces? And balancing that with like what do you need to just remove the barriers and then doing your best work and like really working hard and showing up, getting the job done and learning. So I would say reading plays, finding out what are the plays that are being produced across the country, what is the content, what learning about those things and then putting yourself out there, getting connected with different networks, whether it be family, like theater companies like Family, whether it be there are now like disabled voice performance networks, actor performance networks. So tapping into a lot of those different resources and but mostly it's really just about doing it. And so getting out there, if you're interested in theater, go find a theater near you and see if you can audition or make your own show. Go find an empty theater where you can like write your own piece and go do it. Do it at a Fringe. That's how I did a show a few years ago at the Hollywood Fringe. And I called in all my friends and wrote it and performed it, and it was great. So, really it's just about like making the stuff. And if you need some support with that, again, there are like a lot of classes online or in person that I'd say that's a really great way to start.
Mm-hmm. All righty. Okie dokie.